Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maureen Taylor, the photo detective. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar, which is Metadata and Your Family Photos. If you have any technical issues, the lovely Kayla will be in the chat helping you navigate that. I saw one comment that said they didn't have audio. Kayla will get right on that. And then my guest today, actually, this is the first time I've ever done this, the guest presenter, because I'm not actually presenting today. The guest presenter is Christopher Desmond. I met Christopher Desmond at FGS in Pittsburgh several years ago, and we had a nice conversation. And every time I see him at conferences, we talk about issues with family photographs and how to manage them. And there is a working group that he is now chairman of called the Family History Metadata Working Group. And that's what we're going to talk about today, what that group is and where things are going. And basically, this is an educational program to give back to the community, to show you what might be coming down the pike for all of us to gain better control of our family photographs. And really, Chris, thank you very much for including me in the Family History Metadata Working Group. It was quite an honor to be asked to participate. A couple of housekeeping things before Chris jumps in with his presentation. If you've never done Crowdcast before, along the bottom, there is an Ask the Question. If you have a specific question, you need to go in there, ask the question, and you can also vote on the other questions that are already there. Anything with lots of votes floats to the top. And that is about it. Chris, welcome to this. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for doing it through my channel.
Well, it looks like you got a lot of people that are excited about this topic, Maureen. Look at that. You're already over like 350, and that's quite impressive. Nice work.
Yeah, I think it's pretty impressive that everyone's interested in metadata. I think 5 years ago, if we had said, let's do a talk on metadata, everyone would have gone, what? What is metadata? And
yeah,
now
and I'm sure there's going to be a little bit of that too. Some people are probably still trying to know what that is, but we've presented a few times at Roots Tech on the 101s on metadata and just kind of how things work. And I think it's great. I mean, that we're able to get together. I think when you brought up Pittsburgh, back in the day when they had live conferences that people can go places. That's kind of crazy since this year seems like it's lasted a decade, but what's great about it is that we're able to be, I think, even more efficient in being able to do things. And one of the things I'm really excited about is what we have been doing related to this working group that really is come together based upon a need that we all have in the industry. And some people may not be aware of it, of what the issues are and what the potential ideas are. And this is such a neat thing where, I was approached just like, we approached you to help join this team, a while back. And because of the mission it has of just trying to find ways to allow metadata to be, more broadly used in the industry. So I'm happy to give you an update today of what that is and where we're going. So I think for today, Maureen, what would be good is I can provide an update, which I'm going to throw a few slides up to go through that so people can see what we're talking about with the metadata working group, how that works, and try to keep that to around 15 minutes or so. And then I already see you have tons of questions in here, and we can just go after them if you like. So is that a good plan?
Yeah, we can just riff off the questions. Sure. I like that. And by the way, for everyone in attendance, there will be a replay of this. And I'm working on trying to figure out how to get it up on my website so it'll be there forever. So anyone can watch it at any time for free. So I'm going to step off the screen, Chris, and you're going to share your screen, and I'll come back on at the end.
Sounds great. All right, let me know if I did this correctly. Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
All right, yay for technology. So what we wanted to go over is at least let people know, because most people probably don't even know about the Family History Metadata Working Group, which was announced back at Roots Tech earlier this year. And what we also want to talk about is, what is the problem in the industry with photos? Let's talk about the elephant in the room, what that means, and then perhaps what is this group doing to help solve that? And then we'll kind of finalize with, what does it mean to you? There's a lot of family historians that are on here, that are listening, that their photos are important to them, and they're trying to understand not only what metadata is, but also what does that mean related to the future of their photos. And we'll get into a little bit of that, and I think people will then start to see, and things will click, of what we're trying to do and what we're hoping to do that's going to be good for the industry and really good for the mission of having people's photos, stay alive in the future with all the important information. So let's get to the next piece, the Family History Metadata Working Group. So we started this in 2019. It's a group of various companies that come together that recognize the same issue exists in the industry. So members from Family Search, FISO, MemoryWeb, Permanent, and VividPix are on the current board, and a lot of those folks, all of those folks actually were part of the original team. And what they've set out to do is go through and say, we need to find a way, if we can, to put together standards related to reading and writing metadata and photos. And metadata, for people, if they're thinking about it, like, what is this metadata thing? Just a quick 101. When you take a photo, and especially if you have, with your phones nowadays, everybody's got their phones and they can take photos with it. When you take a photo, especially an example like I have an iPhone, and when you take that photo, it's capturing tons of data points that are actually embedded inside the photo. Date, location, sometimes different aspects of the camera, tons of things, and those things are called metadata. And those travel with those photos, and they can be read by different other groups and as they're uploaded up, and they can be sent along. And what we want to talk about is, like, well, what happens when you actually go through and try to change and edit that in different platforms? Does that go with the photo? And if not, why not? And what should be the thing that we look to do so that we can preserve that great hard work that everybody does related to those photos? So that's one of the things we're trying to solve. And so we're trying to enhance the value of digital metadata in dealing with a way to say, how do we develop standards so that all the different major companies and organizations can then talk about where is the proper place to embed this data so it can be read, and read by you as an individual with wherever you take your photos, but read especially for the future, for when you pass your photos along to future generations, so that information stays alive. And so that is the mission of this group. It's really a mission to really help the industry in going through and talk about what are the key areas that we find that historians use the most, and what are the ways that things are read and written to, and then is there a way we can establish something to help out? So when we get into that, here's the problem we have in the industry right now. Right now, there are no standards. Right now, if you take a photo and try to take it out of a platform, one, you may not, all that information that you might have typed in on the who, what, where, when, it may just stay in that platform and never even go with the photo. But let's pretend you actually have a platform that allows that metadata to be, actually injected into the photo upon exportation. Well, then you also need to make sure that wherever you bring it to, that platform is actually going to read those data points. And there's a lot of companies that still don't do that. And so this is where we're giving direction and advice to where those common fields should be, so that when companies go through and help individuals like those folks on the line understand if they want to go and edit things, or if they add things in any of their major platforms, the metadata does travel with it, especially when it is exported. And so the hope is that we are going to develop standards that will be adopted by the industry, not only for the genealogy industry, but even bigger than that, dealing with the Googles and the Amazons and all these other major companies, because we actually have bridged relationships with some other working groups that deal with photos and their transportability and how that could work. And so we're actually working on a dual platform of working with genealogy, but also the bigger industry. So it's really, really cool stuff. And it has been a lot of work, but we just know this is for the better good of the industry. So here's what we're doing. We've established the working group back in August. We announced our official release of the working group at Roots Tech in 2020, and have our link to the press release in here. We had then different groups that were brought in to say, let's determine a way to develop standards. Let's identify the common areas that we want to have standards for, and let's get working groups to help vet this out and put together the recommendations of best practices of what the standards should be, so that we have a common working platform in the industry. And that turned out to be a really great but time-intensive piece. Luther from our team, as far as the board, was the one chairing that, and it took a lot of time, but that was really the guts of what we spent some time working on, because if we can actually have something that's an active deliverable and output from the group that actually provides suggestions, that's a winner. And so what we're actually going to be talking about today is what that looks like. So we actually have a draft version. I'm going to preview some of that with you. We are still finalizing it and vetting it, also going through and making sure it makes sense to a lot of the organizations that are part of the initiative, because not only do you want to make sure that you can provide these standards, but also can they be implemented, and going through and making sure groups that already have these sort of abilities to embed metadata and photos, that these things can be modified so that these standards can be embedded in the proper fields. So we'll go through that a little bit too. Today, we've completed those metadata standards as far as the draft version. And then, of course, I wanted to put Maureen's podcast down here as far as what we're doing on the webcast, because it's really great to be able to socialize the good work of the team and what's been going on, because I know people are wondering if there's anything that's going to happen in the industry. Well, this is a way we can help communicate that. We're actually going to be presenting the final standards at RootsTech, this one upcoming in 2021. So Luther and I will be presenting that. We're also going to talk through a certification process and what that's going to look like. So companies can then become certified for the standards that we're recommending. And you're probably wondering, why is that important? That's really important because then those platforms, if you're going through and you're adding your family information on a photo or to the right of a photo of the who's in the photo and the date it was really taken, where it was located and the story of it, wouldn't it be great if that information actually traveled with the photo if it were to leave that platform? That's what we want to make sure, that there's a certification process, so that when a company says they've implemented this, we can give them a thumbs up and say they did. And then after that, we're hoping to actually come up with some additional standards related to the go forward pieces, and maybe have a version 2.0, because we needed to have a focused approach for this version related to what standards we wanted to have released. So this is a great shout out to the working groups that participated. So it's even broader than the original companies that were here. And Maureen, you're one of the individuals and companies that participated, and your thoughts were really, really appreciated. Not only as the photo detective, but actually the use cases that are out there related to how is this really going to be used by individuals. And so I just wanted to say thank you for all these groups that have been part of the development of the actual version 1 standards so far. And the hope is that we can get more organizations not only to help with the initiative, but also then get into the certification process that we plan on going through on the initiative. So what did we do? What was the thing that we ended up producing? So the first version of metadata standards are going to be focusing on these key areas. Why? Well, these are the areas that we found that family historians tend to care the most about, like the most common things that people are trying to do when they see an old photo and they want to actually grab that information off of it or make sure it's transferred. What are those things? So it is an album, event, objects, date, caption, location, and people. We had to start somewhere. Those are the 7 that made the cut. There are other ones that were being considered, but we said, let's have a cutoff for version 1. And then for version 2, we can actually talk about a lot of other things when it comes to who is the confidentiality pieces and trademarking and all these other aspects that people are looking for. So let's go through and what does that mean? So this slide I know is going to give people a headache, because they're going to look at this and saying, what is this? This is the deeper dive, and this is not for everybody out there to say, you need to know this. This is actually what we're going to be using when we work with companies to go through and say, hey, when you guys allow in your platform the ability to modify a date or location or the people in there, like a user can go in there and identify that or edit that. When you export a photo from your platform, we are providing the specific IPTC XMP fields that we recommend the mapping of the metadata to, so that it can be read and viewed in future platforms or the individuals. And so these areas called XMP, IPTC, EXIF, this is the naming conventions that are in that. You know, when you have a photo, and I mentioned that captures in the actual photo, there's an area that captures all of this data. Well, this is where that can be produced, and this is open source information, so it's not locked down. This is something that passes with the photo. What we're recommending is where should those things be written to from a core standard perspective. But then when it comes to other best practices, we've added in some optional metadata standard fields that we think is also a way to go above and beyond. So this is kind of the executive summary kind of framing that we're providing for the standards. And then you can see that there are some links in here of a technical summary as well as a normative specification summary. And this gets into the helping companies and their engineers and coders to understand exactly what this means. But at the end of the day, for the individuals that are listening here, and as a family historian, know that we are trying to provide these standards so that when you have information related to the things on the left, those are going to be actually documented so that they can be preserved and moved with the photos. And that's really what matters. And that's the reason why we are doing this, and we're working to try to create that. When we talked about certification, the certification piece means that we're looking to say, if a company allows you to edit a field, a date, a location, you know, a person in the actual photo, then we would say you need to be able to allow, when that photo is exported from that platform, the metadata is properly tagged and brought into the standard fields that we are recommending for our standards. If you do that, you're going to get the thumbs up certification. We're going to allow companies to be able to use that in their marketing, saying Family History Metadata Working Group standards, they've been certified. But there's a lot of companies that are not going to be able to implement this right away, or it would take a while. So we're also having the supporter piece, which means if you're a company and you support that this is important, and you're working to perhaps actually implement this in your company's platform, then this is the piece you can have too. And why we're doing this, it's really making sure more awareness gets out there and actually more companies do this. Because again, that goal with that kind of web that I talked about, we want to make sure that the future portability of all your photos is going to happen in the future, and this is a way to do that. So what does this mean for you? So you're listening to this, and this is my last slide, by the way, because I know we have tons of questions and comments, so we have to get to those. The most important thing for folks to know is, one, well, digitize your photos. Well, okay, if you haven't done that already, how do you do that? Well, there are places to go to give you information on this. I put in here as far as a link to one that's with MemoryWeb, which is the company I'm with, and we have a whole series called Unlock the Shoebox, Your Digital Photos. It's on our website, it's free, and it gives you the best practices of the DPI, all the different things of the ways to scan things and document it so that you're enhancing your ability to organize them. Once you've done that, make sure that you add your metadata to photos if it's not there. And Maureen has a whole class on that. So you can go to her website and you can take a look at that class and what that looks like for digitizing and organizing photos. What this means then, after you've done that, is then find out, where do I stand related to the journey? Because where are your photos at? You're going to have some photos maybe in your hard drive, on the cloud, Dropbox. Especially when you think about those major companies that you might house your photos in, and you've taken the time to go through and curate and add that information in there, including like Google Photos and the other providers. And when you look at that and kind of go, well, what happens if I try to take that photo out? Most companies do not allow the metadata to leave. Most of them don't. There are some that do. And so this is where you can help support the initiative and reach out to them and say, hey, listen, I've got a lot of good stuff in your platform, a lot of good information. I'd like you to make sure that you are helping me for my stuff, allow that stuff to travel with me so it's not trapped inside your platform with all that good information. And so this is the cry we're looking for to have people be aware of. So that's the problem in the industry, but then help with the contacting them and asking them to say, allow us to have that portable. So Maureen, I tried to get through that in 15 minutes. I might have gone to 17 minutes. Sorry about that, but I know that there's a lot of questions. So how do you want to take it from here?
Chris, you have as long as you need. There's no limit. You can just keep going.
Okay.
I know we had, the links are all in the chat now. I shared the wrong link and deleted it, so apologize for that. We have 17 questions.
Okay.
The links are in the chat and just above where you are.
Oh, I see. There's even voting in the
and
question.
there is voting.
What? Okay.
Yeah, what? I know. So do you want to read the question or you want me to read the question?
I can do that. So 18 votes, a two-parter. What would you say are the top 10 or even 5 pieces of info of metadata that each photo should strive to capture? Well, actually, we went through 7 today, right? So we went through the 7 that we found to be the most important or most used fields. And I think those 7 are going to be key for folks, but they can, of course, do more. A lot of platforms will even allow the adding or modification of more than that. But those core ones are the ones that most people care about. And that's the reason why we picked those 7. B, what is the best way to keep those data elements with each photo? Well, it would be to make sure that you're using a platform that allows the reading, editing, and then exportation of the metadata from there. And so there's a lot of different companies that do that. Maureen, you know a bunch of them too, don't you, as far as which type of companies that, allow for that to happen?
I do. I actually recommend, there's some more that I'm doing research on, but the 2 that I recommend are either Chris's company, memoryweb.me, which actually saved me big time last week when my computer crashed because I had all my pictures backed up again and easily downloadable with the metadata intact. And then Adobe Lightroom is the other one that allows you to import, add metadata and export it so that you don't lose it. Now, whatever happens, as Chris said, with the platform that you're going to import it into, that's another matter.
Yeah, and there's even part of the board we have VividPix. VividPix allows you to add metadata to different aspects of their photos, and then File Shadow, which is part of the working group, that company also allows you to add metadata and then also have it exported out. So there are companies that do this, but it's not widely known of companies that do that because it is something that most people didn't even realize was an issue for a long time, but this is an important piece for a lot of companies. So let's go down to the next one. 12 votes on this one. The main thing I want to get out of the meeting is, how do I label digital photographs so future generations have access to the data? Is metadata future-proof? Well, that's exactly the reason why this working group was put together. We can't say future-proof, but we're going to try our darndest to use what we have today and the technology we have today so that the metadata that is imported and brought into the photos that everybody's working on does have a chance to have a future with them. And so that's what we're trying to do. Things could change in the future. We can have different file types, because if you think about it, there's JPEGs and GIFs and PDFs and all these different file types. And guess what? Each of them have different constraints on what they allow to be brought in or used for fields on metadata. So that's something to be thoughtful of. But the key ones that are commonly used do have those fields in there. All right, thank you for that one. Let's take vote number 10. I'm guessing this will be covered, but what fields and metadata are kept with the photo across all platforms, Facebook, Ancestry? So what's interesting, why are you shaking your head, Maureen?
None of them.
Well,
right now.
As far as being covered, so I think what's important to note is that Facebook, Ancestry, MyHeritage, Google, they all have certain aspects of reading they have, and so they will read some fields and not read others. Facebook probably reads a lot more due to the fact that they look to use that information to help them position things for the people in the user base. And what you'll think about it is, if you go into those platforms like Facebook or even Ancestry, in Ancestry, when you're in there and you look at a photo of a family member, you can add a ton of information in there. But when it comes to bringing it out, that's where a lot of times there's a challenge. And there's a challenge when it comes to not only Facebook and Ancestry, but Google Photos. The Google Photos changes the way they allow the exportation of photos by users all the time. Certain companies like ours do have the ability to create what's called an API, so that there's a mass download button you can pick, which then actually allows you to even get metadata attached to it because of the way we do it, versus you as an individual. So it's something that you want to try and look into, but I think the most important takeaway is, again, assess where your stuff's at and what time you're putting into this stuff, and is it going to be okay if it stays there without that metadata going with it, or do you want to make sure it's done somewhere else so that that's preserved in there? So sometimes we have people that will use a platform like ours, put all the metadata in, and then post it up. So then they're not worried about that. They're not worried about it actually not having it in there.
Chris, we have a question in the chat about where is Ancestry.com in this collaboration? Are they participating? What about MyHeritage?
We want to make sure that all of them are going to have some participation. So we reached out at Roots Tech last year to invite them to what we were doing. And I don't think those organizations had some representation during that time, but we went ahead and with that large group that you saw, went ahead with our mission, starting creating standards. And now that we are, getting to the release point, that's where we're going to reach back out and say, here's what we're working with. And this is going to work really well for you guys if you choose to implement this, because the benefits to you as an organization is now you're going to read in the places that is important for you and your users, so that when a photo is brought up to, let's say, MyHeritage, they can now grab those fields and already have them auto-populated. Wouldn't that be great? Instead of having you to repopulate those.
Every time.
Yeah, but then more importantly, when it comes to the editing in their platform, making sure all of that editing travels with it. And that's going to take some development from those companies, but really, in our opinion, it's needed. And that's why this group is coming together, because of the problem in the industry and the need to make sure your photos stay alive.
Marshall wants to know if there's anything Ancestry subscribers can do to lobby them. And what about Family Tree Maker?
I love it.
Yes.
That's what we're looking for. And
that's what we're looking for.
I know that they take feedback from their customers, and they're looking to make sure people are hearing things. I guarantee you, if they get enough emails about it and people asking about it, they're going to be looking around. And especially when we have a working group in this industry already brought of a bunch of companies together with no other purpose but to do something good for the industry, our hope is that this will catch on and companies will want to implement this, or be forced to implement with the help of the people that are listening to this.
There's one other question in the chat before we get to the rest of the questions in the Ask a Question box, which is, will this metadata work with Apple Photos? Now, I think these standards, I think you explained to me, these standards are mostly right now for the genealogy companies, but you're hoping that what will have wider appeal.
That's right. And one thing I think is important to realize is that when the working groups came together to analyze what would be the best fields to choose, part of the research that went into that is finding the most common fields currently large organizations like Apple Photos, like Google, like Facebook would read. Like, which is the date field? Because I think there's over 20 different metadata date fields, okay? Well, okay, which one do they most commonly read? That's the one we wanted then mapped to. So that's the way we put this together. We didn't just pick things and say, oh, that looks good. We actually did some research, because part of it would be, wouldn't it be great if it already were being done and the companies didn't know it? Well, yeah. So for those common date fields, such as date, such as location, those are probably the two most read, right, by most every company, especially out of genealogy. If you can map to those and have them read, that's great, because I get excited when I use our platform and I export a photo that I dated 1940, way before digital photos, and I map the GPS location of that photo from 1940. And if I bring it up to Facebook or Google Photos, I have to scroll down to 1940 in the date range, because that's when it says date taken. To me, that's what we should be able to have happen. That's the thing that we're trying to have happen in the industry.
Well, I can vouch for how difficult this whole process was, because I was on the caption group, in the caption group. And it was like, well, what is the caption? What kind of caption? Which standard caption? What's the field? How much, and it was very specific. And I think the work that the family history metadata group has done, I just did one teeny little piece, but what the group is doing will benefit all of us as genealogists, and hopefully it will extend beyond the genealogy field, because we have a lot of power as genealogists. We're a big industry, and I think other companies will start listening if we get these standards implemented. Let's go back to the questions, Chris. All right, there's the two-parter. There you go.
Which one?
Yo, you did that one already. Here we go. I'd like to know if there's a program that will allow you to add metadata to a group of pictures. I think we covered that already.
We did. I think you mentioned a few and I added a few more.
That's right.
So I think the one with 4 votes is what's the workings groups? Oh, well, it just got.
There it is right there. When a JPEG is saved, it's compressed again, losing quality every save. So when MemoryWeb or others change metadata in the JPEG, will we lose quality each time we change the metadata?
So I think it's a great question, and I think it also depends upon if that platform does a compression of a JPEG. And so I know from our own company's experience, if a JPEG is brought over to a platform, you can bring it over and have it compressed or not. In ours, we do not. We actually bring the original and we store that. And as you then add metadata, we go through and we add a special section that's away from the photo. The important thing is that when you export it, we bring the original photo, the original one that was brought in, and only one time do we then inject that and bring it out. But that's where it gets to the implementation and how a company is going to implement these standards. So I agree, it shouldn't be a constant resaving of the photo. It's more of, if you think about this, it's like a file cabinet. We have all these different files that can go in there with a photo, and how do you join that at the right time? So from a user, you just want to see all your metadata on that platform, but when it's exported, you want to be sure that it's actually in the right fields and have it as the maximum quality of what it was from the original photo. And so it can be done where it's the original photo quality, so it's not compressed coming out. It just depends upon if that platform does that.
Chris, do you have any knowledge of the Library of Congress and metadata? I know, like, the Library of Congress working with cataloging standards for images. I mean, early in my career when I was a curator, we had this like printout from the Library of Congress to come up with visual terms in which to catalog images that different from books and other media. And I know that has evolved into the art and architecture thesaurus and other things like that, but I actually don't know how that fits into metadata. Do you?
So we actually did some research on it. We have some really, really smart people that are part of the board and the different committees that, you know, they geek out on this research, and this is what they do for a living. And so I actually peeked into it myself because I'm kind of curious of if there are any standards, especially when it comes to archiving. One of the debates we had as an overall team is, well, what are the archiving standards for digital photos? And we looked, we couldn't find any. And we saw all the pointing of the Library of Congress and different organizations to these other working groups that had information that they put out there. And if you dive into all the working groups, they talk about the theoretical pieces of it, but nobody's produced standards. Nobody's produced to say, here's what we would recommend. And so that's what we are working with. We're saying, but you know, one of the questions that came up is like, what if you take, like, use your iPhone and you take a photo of an old photo? Well, guess what? It has today's date on it. You know it's not the right date. But is it correct to overwrite the original date of the photo that was taken of the old photo? Or what's the archiving process for that? And that was the debate we had. Because of the goal to make sure metadata can be read, we allow, at least from a discussion draft, is that you can overwrite that field, but it's up to the provider or the actual family historian. If there's a change being made, you can document that. There's lots of open source fields to do that. There's even an information field in a metadata that can perhaps be used by a company if they wanted to. Any changes that are made, they can have the whole list from an archiving perspective. But there's not even a standard for the first piece, let alone the second. But what we've done in one of the slides I showed you is that we have recommendations that are best practices, so that if that comes up and we have people that are, pure archivists, at least we give some direction of the how to, so that that can be done as well. But it's not perfect, but it's better than where we're at today.
Got a couple more questions here.
The
What about the compatibility with Adobe standards for metadata?
So what's interesting is that we, as part of the team, look through the different platforms, including Adobe, to make sure that if something was brought in, if it was brought in the same fields that we are mapping to. And there's a lot of good overlap. So I think Adobe already has much of this already brought in there. It also deals with, though, the nomenclature of what the fields are called, because you have to appreciate when you get into, let's say, the IPTC, they have their complete database and they have a website, and they even have a test photo that has all the metadata populated. And you can bring that into platforms and see how it's read. What's interesting is that when it's read by a platform, including Adobe, Adobe's going to tell you what they call that field. And it may not be the exact name that IPTC had. So that's where you just to make sure you're able to breadcrumb back and knowing what fields are actually being edited. But for the most part, everybody's trying to do the right thing and call them the same fields. And so when we came up with our recommended draft standards for version 1, we were looking at products like that to say, what happens now if that were to be changed, which we did. We changed that, brought that into those platforms, and you know what? Most all of the fields were read, which was great. And the same thing when it comes to editing. So that's where almost all the fields did have a recommended standards, but there were some tweaks. Even our company, MemoryWeb, when we developed the stuff, we thought we had everything under control. But after the deep research this group did on recommendations, we actually changed the way we export photos out of our own company's platform to follow the recommended standards we're recommending from the metadata working group. Why? Because it made more sense. And every company was kind of like the wild, wild west, doing their own thing to figure out what they wanted to do. But to have some, all these groups that are there to work together to come up with a recommendation, that's what made sense. So that we know it's possible. We know companies can implement this. Now it's a matter of hope that we are able to get this more widely used in the industry.
Oh.
All right. When scanning old photos, is there a preferred format?
Oh, where are you? We're down the bottom.
The one with 5 votes. I don't know.
Oh, do we get some more votes? We got some more questions?
Yeah. Maureen, I'm going to ask you this one. Wait, it just moved around.
Yeah, I have it. Is there a preferred file format, JPEG, TIFF, etc., for best metadata flexibility? It's not really the file format that determines metadata flexibility, but for preservation standards, you really want to scan your images at 600 to 1200 DPI as a TIFF file. Library of Congress says 1200 DPI. Full color TIFFs, even if you think they're black and white, do it as a color image. And then you can always decrease the size of the file, but you can't necessarily increase it and keep that quality. So that one is good for me. Oh yeah, that one got added in. We already talked about Adobe standards. Metadata for photos can be added as properties for files using some applications. How useful have you found these applications, and or portable have you found the properties between different OS versions and file systems? Just experienced this kind of thing myself.
What do you think, Maureen?
Well, I tried to, my computer completely had to be reset, and I had been backing it up on Time Machine, and the Time Machine files were in one OS operating system version, and the computer was now at another one, and it was complicated. I just said, forget it.
Well,
and then restarted a new Time Machine with the new OS.
Yeah. Well, it can be very frustrating too. In fact, the whole reason why we started MemoryWeb was family historian, one holiday season, was scanning my photos, and I didn't know if there was any solution out there that allowed me to add that information. So I would take my computer, scan it in, right click, change the title, and then go through and what areas could I change and try to overwrite those. And I got so excited. I spent hours and hours over that holiday period. And then I'm like, well, you know what? I spent all that time. I'm going to make a copy of it. So I made a copy of it as a backup. And guess what happened, Maureen? All of the hard work on the titles of saying the who, what, where, when, it auto cut off. and
Yeah.
all that information was lost, and I went nuts, and I was so mad, and I talked to my wife about it, and I said there's got to be a better solution, and I was thinking about it and researching it. I'm like, you know what, maybe we should just build something that does that. It's so frustrating. And that's how we actually started Memory Web, was from the true need that we personally had of that process. And the thing is, you're beholden to whatever you're using related to how that gets edited, and what they're showing you that gets edited, but then more importantly what gets transferred. So that's where what our hope is as a family history metadata working group is that all that hard work is not lost. And that's what we're trying to make sure happens to your stuff, because nothing's more frustrating than having your good work go away. And it's just like if you had your hard drive crash and you're like, I hope I have everything backed up. But if you ever have been in that situation where you lost those photos, it just takes something out of you, right?
It
Well,
does.
imagine,
It
yeah.
does. That pit in your stomach. I will say that just like you, I spent a long weekend once using Apple Photos. This was before I used a photo organizer like I do now, and I added all the metadata to those images, thinking that it would transfer to my phone and it would transfer to my iPad, and in fact, it did not. Apple Photos organizes in different ways on different platforms, and I had to redo it again. So then I went online and I tried to find these apps that would work, and I had to upload, add all that metadata again, and it failed again and again and again. And I was so frustrated. But I think out of this kind of industry frustration comes innovators. And I think the Family History Metadata Working Group is an innovative group thinking of solutions to these problems that we face. There's several other new things in the last couple of years that are just awesome. I know Chris mentioned my podcast, and I am very busy tracking down industry leaders to talk about some of these new innovations for everyone so that you can then try them and see what you think. A couple of other questions here.
I've got one that popped up here that I want to address. So it says, MyHeritage allows you to identify the people in the
Oh,
photo
yeah.
by drawing a rectangle around them and assigning the rectangle to a name. Is there a standard way that should be represented in the photo metadata? That's an awesome question. And it's actually something that has come out more recently from IPTC. So that functionality is every platform has their own choice on how you want to do, let's say, tagging people or objects in a photo. And you can use the square approach or the star or circle. All you're doing is giving the specific coordinates of where in the photo something resides so that it can be tagged to. That's the basics of it. And so as a platform does that, they have the ability actually to then map that into the metadata. And before, it was just being able to map, let's say, the name. But IPTC came out, I believe it was in November of 2019, with the ability to now have some new open source fields. So when actual, let's say, coordinates within a photo are designated for a person or an object, those also can be then mapped into the metadata, which then allows it to be read and brought in by another platform. That is very new, and I'm pretty certain most companies don't have that implemented because they don't even implement the regular metadata mapping. This one's going to be a little trickier to do, but the technology's out there, which is awesome. And so that's where there's hope that all of that hard work could be then brought in to the photos if they were to leave a platform like, let's say, MyHeritage.
So we have some more questions in the chat, but we also have some other questions here in the question and answer box. Joan has been using Picasa for her genealogy photos in the past. Is there any way out there that is similar? And can I sync the info I have entered into Picasa into a newer program? Joan, I will tell you that Google hasn't supported Picasa for a great many years. It's a 32-bit program. If you're using Apple OS, it no longer works. And I don't know what you can sync that data with. Since Picasa was owned by Google, perhaps there is a way to sync it with Google Photos. But that's the only solution I can think of for that, Chris, unless you have something to add. it hasn't been supported by a decade or more, maybe.
I think the number one piece of advice is to get your photos out of there so that you can then have them if by chance you're still able to export the metadata from them. And I would actually do that across the board, Maureen, if you could, because if there is an option to do that with whatever platforms you have, I would take advantage of it. Because, for example, like Google, they change what you can take out all the time. As a
Yeah,
company, we
no.
have to keep on changing the way we are mapping things, because all of a sudden they maybe don't allow location anymore, or they don't allow people to leave anymore. And so you don't want to lose that. So you want to make sure maybe you back it up now. So you get that in there now, and then later on, see if you can get better information or not. I just don't, if a platform to me doesn't allow the reading, editing, and exportation of metadata, I don't think I would be using them as my storage or place.
No, Google Photos, there are people who swear by Google Photos, but there are issues with it. And so I prefer to use a different program than that. Someone has digitized over 6,000 slides and wants to identify who, when, where, and have it available for the future. They are Mac in Photos. I would move to a different type of photo organizer, one that you can continue to read that metadata, because Apple changes stuff all the time as well. Let's see what else we got. Looks to me like photos can have text and graphics added to the imagery to give context and meaning. So the metadata goes with the photos and is viewable graphically at least. Is there an easier way to do that? I'm confused about what might be easier about.
I think it's a feature, and our company allows for the metadata to actually appear on the photo if people like, or you can have the information or write things on there. The only thing is that it's not the metadata, it's actually part of the photo now, but you see the information when it's being exported. The key thing that we're talking about is having it written to the fields that are actually read. So if you actually place something on the image, a text, a name, whatever it is, that's not going to be something that can be read unless that platform actually takes the photo and tries to do some auto OCR, object character recognition of some sort, to read that and then map it. But you're asking for an even bigger lift than having metadata standards to begin with. But there are platforms that allow for that. Our users actually use that. So when they post, let's say, to an Ancestry or to a MyHeritage, it's then known what the metadata in the photo is, because that platform may not be reading it, but you're showing it in the photo, and they're using it, saying this is not the original, but this is the one I'm posting up to that platform, so that not only can you see the photo, but you can see the metadata that person's taken the time to archive and put on the bottom of the photo, for whatever that's worth.
Any plans to extend this to things like PDFs for our documents?
There can be some things done for that. You can actually have PDFs read. PDFs do have metadata fields. It just becomes challenging when you have PDFs, JPEGs, GIFs, and all these different file types, and which ones are going to be longer term from a preservation perspective and an editing perspective, and ones that are going to be used more commonly, because PDFs, people don't typically take photos in PDFs or send photos around. But I think the question, if it would be broader and saying beyond photos, if we think about documents and other things, yeah, that's where this should go next. That should be something in the future that we get into standards for all of those other things. When it comes to the digitization of those, we wanted to start with photos because that's the most common thing people are using and the ones that they need to have the most done for.
Someone wants to know, in the Windows program that allows me to add the metadata, and will this data stay with my photos when I add them to Family Search and MyHeritage, etc.? Varies on the platform.
Yeah, so that's actually what I was talking my story earlier about, why we started our company, was I was doing that in Windows. I was right-clicking and editing those fields. The good part about it is the majority of that information should stay there. However, if you make a copy of, let's say, a photo and you wrote too much into, let's say, the title field, there's a certain amount of characters that are allowed, and they'll truncate that automatically. And that's a little frustrating. So you have to make sure you pick fields that are going to be open source. But the good thing is they should be transportable. Now the question is, do those platforms read that? Well, You can do tests on your own. And if it doesn't show up in the platform, it doesn't mean the metadata is not there or didn't go there. It's whether or not that platform chose to read it. And that's the key thing.
Mm-hmm. And metadata is searchable. So that's the beautiful part of it is I can, I use the MemoryWeb app and I use MemoryWeb as a program. Everybody knows that. And we have an affiliate relationship to be clear, but I can search the app or my desktop. And this is what I was doing last week when the computer, went and I, had the photos. I just didn't have them organized, but I had them in MemoryWeb and I needed a photo for a presentation and I searched it and up it came. I searched by the person's name and I searched by the date. I could search by all the metadata that I had added, and it was perfect.
I'm just responding to some people in the chat, just to let people know if they want.
Yeah, it's memoryweb.me or come to my blog or Facebook
Go to
podcast.
Maureen. She's got all the good stuff. And again,
it is
not about our
service.
Yeah, it's not about the company. It's about
the Family History Metadata Working Group.
That's what the
so that's just my choice. There are plenty of other programs out there. There's people mentioning programs that they use out in the chat. Somebody read an article about a guy who includes all the key info in the photo name. You can do that. I recommend that people put a last name, first name, and a date, but you don't actually have to do that with a photo organizer of some sort with metadata.
That's the issue I had. That's what happened. I did all that, and then it got truncated automatically upon.
Oh, yeah, you can do that. Yeah,
and I'm like, that's when I don't know what item in the house broke that day, but something didn't make it, and it was very frustrating.
We have so many questions, Chris. I'm going to let you scroll down the bottom here of the list.
I'm going to avoid a lot of the personal ones about the company, and I want to get more about either the standards or the initiative.
Need to add this group to the Wikipedia metadata group. There you go. Oh. There's a link for you.
Look at that. Got scooped. Yeah.
Yeah, you better get the Family History Metadata group on there.
So I like this one from Marshall. I see Marshall's name popping up all over the place. So Marshall's definitely passionate about this. So that's awesome. You talk about overriding fields. It's a standard that you're working on, provide a method for recording the change history. Yes. And so what we have done is that we're not requiring that because there's no specific things, even the Library of Congress for that. But what we wanted to do is there's two different things. One, if a company wants to, they actually can have the change history of a photo and have that and put that into an open source metadata field. So for example, there's a field called information. That information field could be housed for that. But the key thing is which platform reads information or where you're going to get that. And there's different things that you can use. There's a website called Jeffries that can read your metadata, IPTC, you can bring it in there. But when it comes to be a user perspective, if I were to think about doing the archiving myself and talking about what's the best way, a lot of times the area of comments is used. And even in the Windows platform, when you right click and there's comments, that's kind of like an open source field that has a lot of area in there. You can type a lot of information. You yourself can put the change history in. And that way you know it's been done the way you want it to be done instead of waiting for maybe a company to implement something, which is going to be a long way out, not only for companies to implement maybe the metadata standards we're recommending, but the change history for archiving, I think you got a little while to wait, but you can do that yourself.
And I mean, this is all just beginning. There's a long road in front of this. I mean, this is just, it's 1 year, not even a whole year since this whole group came together formally at Roots Tech. So there's a lot of room for growth. There's a lot of room to spread the word. Everybody's trying to get the word out there. I think you've done a couple of episodes on my podcast about it when it first started, and then not too long ago, and now we're doing this webinar trying to spread the word. So all of you are ambassadors of the Family History Metadata Working Group.
And you know what's really great, Maureen, is I think the IQ of family historians has gone up dramatically in the last couple of years. I remember when we were, they were asking for presentations at Roots Tech a few years ago, and we did something that was called Behind the Metadata Curtain, where we're going to pull the curtain and go through and talk about like who does this in the industry, who reads and who doesn't read, and we graded them, okay? And
Yeah.
it caused a huge conflict, but guess
Yes,
what?
it did.
It caused awareness. And that's what was important, because people, one, didn't realize that this was possible, that metadata would travel the photo. And then two, they're like, what do you mean that my information that I have in these major companies, when I type that in there, that's forever, isn't it? Well, no, it wasn't. And it's not. And some of those today are still not. But you need to know that, because you don't want to be on the short end of that stick when you go to say, yep, all the work is here and nobody can take it out. What happens if
Exactly.
that company doesn't stay around?
You really shook stuff up with that.
Well, I credit Nancy for that more than me, but it
That
was
was
something that
pretty
was
awesome,
yeah,
actually.
it
I
was
think
fun. But you know what? It was for the same reason we're doing this today. It's awareness, and it's something we care about. I mean, the whole thing of this is that we care about, our stuff, the stuff that, other users have. I mean, how awesome is it going to be for future generations to say, gosh, there was a time when all this stuff, nothing was documented. The only thing people had was hard copy photos, and you flipped it over to see the information on the back, and that's all you got. Well,
and
in the
now
digital age, yeah, it's like you can
look
do
what you
so
can do
much
with it.
more.
You can upload it, you can change the metadata in whatever program you're using. You can collaborate with people and have them add their details. I mean, it's amazing what digital platforms have done for family history and family photos. I'm amazed and always learning new things. A post-session handout answering some of these questions. Robert, you just made some work for me.
I think Maureen, though, would be great to do, is that the amount of questions is fantastic.
It's
And I
fantastic.
think that in your in your website and your company, there's a lot of stuff and rich information that's tied to this, and maybe in the show notes or however you guys want to do that, you can kind of put those links in there that people can go to kind of gather that information, because I think that'd be really helpful now that to some people this might be their eye-opening moment of metadata and the lack of transferability it has, and where do I go to learn more about it? Well, I know you already have a lot of good stuff on that.
Yeah, there may be a way for me to export this and create just a simple transcript of this entire conversation. It wouldn't be very, very difficult to do. But I do want to thank Christopher Desmond of the Family History Metadata Working Group and memoryweb.me for agreeing to do this informational session on metadata and your family photos. There will be a replay. I know I can download the chat, but I don't know if you guys can see up here at the top, they have options, but I think that might just be a organizer thing. So first, let me get the replay going, and then let me see if I can get a transcript of this. And then you will all get an email from me through my email newsletter system telling you about a couple of links and all of that. When I won't have the chat ready or the transcript ready by the time that goes out tonight. So when I do have it ready, I will send out another email with a link to, I'm assuming I can make a PDF of it all. It won't be very fancy. I'm not going to edit it much. It'll just be a transcript of what we talked about in this session.
Maureen, I just wanted to thank you. Thank you so much for putting this on, because I think the efforts that you and the photo detective are making, from like broadcasting this and making awareness of not only the issue but what's coming down the pipeline and why it's important, and what the Family History Metadata Working Group is trying to do to help out with that. Folks like you are just, thanks. This is great, and appreciate you having us on to talk through it.
I think we're going to have some more sessions, Chris.
Uh-oh. All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining me.
Bye-bye.